Japan, 1750 to 1914. Japan was ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate from 1603 to 1867, and most of Japan was a feudalistic society, some areas which were even tribalistic, and there was a strict social hierarchy. Then, in the late Tokugawa period, economic growth and prosperity was due to increased agricultural production, and there was a slow progression towards the elimination of feudal social classes. And also, Tokyo, or Edo back then, was the world's largest city, and so this is the road to Japan's modernization. The shogunate during the Tokugawa shogunate had very loose control, and the centralized government was mostly non-existent as daimyos controlled different provinces across the entire nation, but there was an understanding of the absolute power of the Japanese emperor and shogun. International political interaction was absent, and the capital of Japan was Kyoto. Confucianism was the main religion of the people, although Shintoism and Buddhism were prevalent. The upper social classes in the country were ruled by the emperor, who was the leader, but a ruler only in name, while the shogun was the actual ruler and the supreme military commander. The daimyos were the governors and landowners whose land was protected by the samurai, who were the warrior class and most respected class following the Bushido Code. The lower classes consisted of the ronin, who were also warriors but not as prestigious as samurai, and lastly, the peasants, merchants, and artisans consisted of most of the population, and they were poor. The economy during this time was non-industrialized. Manufacturing was non-existent as most goods were made by hand. Not commercialized either, and they were technologically behind the rest of the world. Their foreign policy consisted of something called isolationism. They closed their doors to foreigners completely, and if you left Japan and you were Japanese, you could not return. This is because the Japanese had bad experiences with the Europeans in the past, and they did not want Christianity to spread in Japan. The shogun threatened to kill the foreigners who arrived.
Introduction to Modernization. On March 8, 1854, Commodore Matthew Perry, sent by President Fillmore of the United States, arrived on the shores of Japan with a powerful fleet. His purpose was to negotiate a trade agreement with the Japanese. The Japanese were terrified of Perry's large black ships and thought they were dragons. Perry's arrival created great controversy in Japan. The question was, should we modernize or hold on to our customs and beliefs? This created a warring period in Japan, but despite the controversy, the shogun's decision was clear. On March 31, 1854, Commodore Matthew Perry signs the Treaty of Kanagawa. This treaty opened Japan's doors because the Americans were using force to make them agree to trade. The treaty did three major things. It opened up 5 ports to the Americans. It established permanent friendship between the U.S. and Japan, and ensured the safety of American soldiers. But even after this treaty, people were still split. This led to some conflicts in Japan between the Japanese and the foreigners. The Namagabe Incident of 1862 occurred when a British group of men did not let a group of samurai pass them on the road as they stand to the side, as protocol requires. The samurai group killed the British men. Back in Britain, they were very upset, and so the shogun placed the samurai in the incident under arrest. Authorities in Japan, though, would not agree to arrest the samurai because of their respected position. This was an incident that showed resistance towards the foreigners. Was the treaty good or bad for the shogun? Incidents like the Namagabe incident led people to turn their heads to the shogun and question his power. Another thing that led to the shogun's demise was Yoshida Shoin. Yoshida Shoin was a teacher in Japan. He tried to sneak onto one of Perry's ships and was caught. The Americans started teaching him Western ways, and then Yoshida taught his students Western ways. He taught that in order to westernize, they needed to go to the West and learn themselves. Yoshida was eventually executed for plotting against the shogun, but his followers brought military technology back from the West which was eventually used to defeat the shogun. But now, rebelling against the foreigners was not all the Japanese wanted. They wanted the shogun out. Anti-government supporters realized, like Yoshida Shoin, they could learn military technology from the West to help overthrow the government. And so, in 1867, the Tokugawa shogunate stepped down from his position. He resigned because of foreign influence disrupting the social hierarchy which he was a major part of. And the shogun entered into an agreement without the emperor's consent, making the emperor look powerless, which he was, and therefore he had to be replaced. And then this led to the Meiji Restoration.
A new era. On February 3rd, 1867, at 15 years old, Emperor Mutsushito, or simply known as Emperor Meiji, ascends to the throne until July 30th, 1912. He was a strong supporter of westernization, industrialization, and modernization. And when a new emperor came, new changes would change Japan forever. One of the emperor's first legislature that he passed was the Charter Oath of April 1868. He created an assembly widely convoked to discuss matters of the state, and it also created the Imperial Diet, although it didn't do much since it answered directly to the emperor. The emperor was the absolute ruler with supreme authority, and his coming united all the classes of Japan and gave them new rights and privileges, while also outlawing all the traditional previous privileges of the samurai class. Base customs of Japan were abandoned and modernization was put in its place. Now that all of the traditional Japanese culture was gone, along with feudalism, the economy changed completely. What should they put in its place? This started a new period of experimentation. World customs were taken in while people were promoted, demoted, and political recognition was established. Zen Buddhism, with elements of Shintoism, now became dominant over Confucianism as well. Fikoku Kihoi, or rich country, strong military, was the main focus of the state. This included main foci points of expansionism, imperialism, militarism, a more effective centralized rule, and the strong and heavily supported idea of modernization. The government was established to form the basis of the Daijikoken. The Imperial Diet was also acted like the Parliament of England, but didn't have much power. Like previously stated, it answered directly to the emperor. The Daijikoken had 7 departments: the legislative, which is the upper class of bureaucrats, and the lower assembly of the domain representatives. It included the executive, the Shinto, finance, military, foreign affairs, and civil affairs. Territory was divided up into prefectures, ken, and municipalities, or fu, administered by civil affairs, and 273 semi-independent domains. Agents from the central government were sent to each domain to work and create administrative unity and work in directives of the central government. Many Western ministries were set up. White houses were built, modern court and legal systems, the economy was modernized, railroads were constructed, machinery and manufacturing replaced handwork, and yens were used as a currency. Western clothing replaced the traditional Japanese dressing, and Japan's new constitution was more democratic following Western government practices. With the disappearance of the traditional domains, the samurai lost their positions as the hereditary bureaucratic class, deprived of all their special privileges, and in 1873, universal military conscription was replaced by a national army who made the samurai useless. And in 1876, the samurai were prohibited from wearing their swords and their badge of distinction in public. By the late 1870s, the samurai ways of life and traditions were completely outlawed by the imperial government of Japan.
The samurai fight back. The samurai lost all their special privileges, hereditary position, and their military position, which was now replaced by a national army by the late 1870s. But the samurai were not ready to give up their honor so easily, and they fought back in a series of revolts. One of these revolts was the Satsuma Rebellion. The Satsuma Rebellion occurred from January 29th to September 24th, 1877. This revolt was from the Satsuma clan based in the southern region of the island of Kyushu, led by samurai Seigo Tamakori. The government usually crushed the samurai due to their modern weapons and tactics. The social class of the Meiji period was less defined. It followed the path that industrialization took in Europe did. There was the emergence of a middle class. The poor moved to the cities to look for work in manufacturing industries like mining. Families were ripped apart due to long hours in the factories, and pollution and poor living conditions occurred in cities everywhere. 3 major problems faced the economy of Japan. The first was, how were they going to afford the large amounts of money needed to build their new infrastructure? The solution was, they placed the most able men into the finance industry and made sure they had support by helping everyone. The second problem was, how would they get the technical expertise to do this? They couldn't follow China's example of foreigners controlling private commerce. The solution was they hired oyato, honorable employees, and had foreign experts hired by the government. The third and last problem was, how could they convince merchants to invest in new risky ventures? So they created pilot industries to demonstrate the Western techniques. They hired entrepreneurs and private capital. Lastly, financial techniques helped the Japanese tremendously.
Imperialism. Japan starts its empire building beyond its native archipelago. How did Japan affect the world? Countries in the West were not affected by Japan very much, besides the fact that Japan may have interfered with Western nations' empire building, such as in East Asia. Countries close to Japan, such as China, Korea, and Russia, were definitely affected because of their close proximity to Japan. Japan eventually tried to take over China and Russia, well, only some parts. This is shown to the Sino and Russo-Japanese Wars and Japanese spheres of influence over Korea. The Sino-Japanese War occurred in 1894 to 1895. Japan declared war on China because of the overlapping influence on Korea. Japan emerged victorious over China due to its overpowering industrial military. The Russo-Japanese War occurred in 1904 to 1905. Japan declared war on Russia, resulting in a victorious win for Japan. This preview showed that Russia was not as strong thought, and more importantly, Japan is now to be reckoned with due to their industrial economy, state building, expansion, and conflict. The U.S. purpose coming to Japan was the desire to expand trade with Japan and then eventually get into China. Another example is that Japan was modernized and they decided to expand their empire. This shows overall that this became the development and interaction of cultures, since the reason the West came to Japan was for economic gain. The spread of modern ideology and philosophy eventually led to a new modern Japan,
such as improved sciences and technologies like guns and new forms of government and how to behave in society.
In conclusion, Japan, because of this time period and its rapid transformation and emergence as a major power throughout the 1900s, has propelled it to one of the most powerful and role model-like countries the world has ever seen, and still continues to do so till today.